Baba oh, hey
Thank you. It's so great to be joining you all. So our panel is going to dig into some of the meaty questions around sovereignty and other topics around data. But I wanted to kick things off with a framing around blockchain and AI. And I'd really like you to imagine something with me, which is imagine if Jeff Bezos just vanished from the modern internet and left no trace behind. We had no memes about his transformation from nerd to Hulk, no posts about his morning puttering routine and meeting agendas, no digital history at all. And that dystopian scenario is not the case for Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, but it is the case for Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba on the Chinese internet. And we are really at a pivotal moment in our relationship to information, value, and power that's mediated by the technologies we invented. In many ways, our digital past is eroding. And Jack Ma isn't the only example of this. The Chinese language internet is rapidly collapsing, and content that predates the emergence of the mobile internet has almost entirely disappeared. This means everything from local earthquake coverage to historical events is no longer online. And we know about this in part because a Chinese blogger who covers famous individuals such as Jack Ma posted about it in May of this year, documenting the fact that he'd run a search on Baidu to find content about Jack Ma from the search range of sort of 1998 to 2005, and only came up with one search result, and it's an erroneous one at that. So literally a time period where you would imagine seeing so much information about a very famous entrepreneur, and really nothing appears. Of course, even worse, the blog post itself that documents this disappeared. It was scrubbed by content moderators. But the only reason we have it is that the Wayback Machine, a project by the Internet Archive, a US nonprofit that stores websites for posterity, had taken a snapshot of the blog post before it was removed. So content moderation and scrubbing of digital information is really just one way that our internet is vulnerable. Another reason our internet is vulnerable today is when we think about link rot, which is increasingly pervasive. I'll walk you through some of these numbers, but Pew Research Center put out a study quite recently that said a quarter of all web pages that existed from 2013 to 2023 are no longer available or accessible. And the numbers go on. 23% of news pages contain at least one broken link, as do 21% of government pages. And then 54% of Wikipedia pages have a broken reference, which means that if you go to the reference section, it points to a page that no longer exists. A separate study showed that essentially a quarter of scholarly articles are not being properly archived and preserved. And so, this was out of about 7 million digital publications. So we're losing a lot of information that we used to think existed forever. This is sometimes known as a KT boundary of information. It's a term that suggests the extinction of information from one era to the next, analogous to the transition from the Cretaceous to the Tertiary periods in geological terms. So when we transitioned from the age of dinosaurs to the age of mammals, we've lost a huge amount of information. And so we're at sort of one of these informational shifts again, where a lot of information can go extinct. And ultimately, if we don't work on knowledge integrity at many levels today, we face a future where the verification of historical knowledge and data, especially digital knowledge and data, will become challenging, if not impossible. So far, I'm telling this story that we're losing a lot of information, and that is true. But simultaneously, since 2022, we've all experienced the rise of generative AI and an onslaught of new information. I'm sure everybody's seen or used AI-generated content, whether it's images or podcasts or video, or tinkered around with some of these tools. And some estimates put it that about 90% of information on the internet will be AI generated in just a few years' time. Artificial intelligence advances, what we've seen mostly so far in the form of LLMs, are essentially shifting the balance of knowledge creation. And it doesn't really matter where you fall on the spectrum of believing how close or far we are to developing artificial general intelligence or super intelligence. We kind of all have to acknowledge and deal with the fact that we have many new agents in our midst and that they're not going away. And this is transitioning into our world of work as well. So McKinsey's global survey on AI suggests that about 65% of their respondents reported that their organizations regularly use generative AI, which is nearly double from the result just 10 months ago when they did this same survey. So we're seeing really a lot of pervasive use. And these deep learning models are trained on web scale data sets, which are crawled from the internet. And as a for instance, OpenAI transcribed about 1 million hours of YouTube videos to train GPT-4. But these models have increasingly been sucking up training data and looking for, their developers are looking for new data sources, including synthetic data, which is data that's generated by the models themselves. So as they're trying to sort of hoover up all this additional new data, thinking that more data leads to better models, we're seeing some interesting countermeasures to that as well. So there's an increased use of things like data poisoning tactics, because many people don't want necessarily their data or their website's data included in models without their consent. Obviously, there's some licensing deals that are also underway, but we are seeing a large amount of scraping. And data poisoning ends up meaning that actually our sort of AI commons is kind of declining because it's getting populated by information that may not actually be correct and then gets incorrectly scraped into these models. So that's an additional problem we're seeing. And there's another concern, which is called model collapse. I've already said that these models are trained on the internet, and eventually the internet itself could be made up of more generative AI material, visual, and text information than pre-2022 human-generated information. And so it could eventually be that these models sort of feed on their own outputs in a kind of negative sort of incestuous spiral, and that we get poor outcomes. I want to mention that synthetic data, I think, is also very fascinating and creates all sorts of new opportunities in terms of being able to run trials and simulations on data that we wouldn't otherwise be able to have access to. So that is an interesting opportunity space. But we've all experienced and seen different versions of sort of poor outputs from existing AIs. The one that comes to mind the most for me is Google's AI overviews tool, which is sort of how they were piloting giving answers to queries instead of showing ranked search results. It would sort of just deliver you this answer in prose. And one of the queries that went quite viral in the answer was, how do you keep cheese on pizza? And the answer, of course, came back very erroneous, which was to use non-toxic glue. And most people would look at that and say, wow, that's a really bad answer. And of course it was, and it makes sense in some cases because the That's a very odd query, not something that's been probably asked and answered on the internet over the ages. And so there's very few pieces of data to use for a model to answer that kind of question. So probably relied on some jokes, et cetera. So where does Web3 and blockchain play a role in this era of a fragile internet and also the rise of AI? I love this quote by Dominic Williams. He's the founder and chief scientist of Dfinity, which runs the Internet Computer Protocol. And he says, in the future, we will just talk to AI to create and update the running web applications and internet services we want. And I think that really shows some of where we are headed and some of the ways entrepreneurs in this field are thinking about AI in particular. But both AI and crypto give us bold expansions of how we codify, transfer, and make meaning out of digital information. And these technologies, I think, actually hold the potential to rebalance our digital architecture, making it more secure and also more verifiable. Some people believe that in the future, essentially every company will be an AI company. And I think if that's the case, we want to get the infrastructure right and also ensure that Web3 leads in that space. So probably many of you know this, it's more refresh than anything, but there's good reason to think of Web3 as the infrastructure for AI and for an AI that serves people going forward. And that's partly because blockchains are very good for identity of people, of companies, of communities, agents, software. These identities can be verifiable and pseudonymous, which is increasingly important. They're very good at transactions, whether it's global, instant, uncensorable payments, or in the form of creating fungible and non-fungible value tokenization. They're very good at marketplaces, monetizing everything from the tangible to the intangible, and also building incentives and incentive mechanisms into those kinds of marketplaces. You can think of prediction marketplaces, reputation marketplaces. There are many versions of that. They're good for coordination. That could be establishing consensus on decisions, or it's also takes the form of enabling autonomous and programmable interactions between software, which is essentially what we're talking about here. They're very good for verification, whether it's audit trails and proofs and timestamps, or the emergence of zero-knowledge proofs, which has been really bolstered by the blockchain space. It's an important area to be able to think about verification of AI outputs as we increasingly rely on AI going forward. And finally, they're good at persistence, which most people, I think, leave off in the affordances, but is important because it differentiates it also from the world of Web 2. Part of what makes Web 3 so exciting is the ability to have composability and modularity of different software products without platform risk in your infrastructure, and the idea that the APIs you rely on to build something on top would go away. We don't have that. We have persistent APIs in Web 3, and that really does change what kind of innovation we can sort of cycle through, because we're building on top as opposed to worrying or reinventing the wheel from underneath. This is a bit provocative, but there are a number of these sort of comparisons between the two fields of why one needs the other that folks have taken. Balaji has some of these. Some of them also come from founder of Near, but I like putting them out there and sort of seeing which ones people agree with. I particularly like the idea that AI generates and crypto authenticates, or that AI is opaque and crypto is verifiable. And the last one I think is quite interesting too. If we think about AI needing governance, crypto offers sovereign code. So really this idea that one field actually needs the other, right? And that Web3 maybe needs AI to a certain degree for the user experience and to improve adoption and just how we interact with what should be essentially an invisible backend infrastructure. And AI definitely needs Web3 in terms of being able to ensure that that architecture is correct. So when we look at the AI tech stack, there's a number of lenses you can apply to this. And I think it's helpful sometimes to use that to evaluate different projects that are emerging and that we all know. So one of those is, thinking about, is a project open or closed? We've seen projects like OpenAI, which are in fact closed. They're not open source projects. And then we have projects like Llama, which are open source to a degree, but actually would in some areas fail OSI's definition of open source. We can also think about whether projects are private or public. There are a number of public AI initiatives underway from different nation states, from different subnational organizations in the realm of science and a number of other topics. And then we can also think about whether a project is horizontal or vertical in sort of their activity. You can see this is a diagram from the Public AI Network, which is an emerging group, sort of a coalition internationally that's looking at public AI specifically. But you can imagine, there are decentralized versions of, there are activities of AI that are either in the compute space or in the training space or in the model space, et cetera. So taking slices as opposed to vertical end-to-end platforms such as Anthropic or OpenAI. And so this is sort of similar in the Web3 space. If you look at what's happening in Web3 and how people are approaching AI from the Web3 perspective, you can kind of see three buckets of approaches or categories. And these are very loose. It's just to sort of give people something to think about going forward. As you start to see a lot of projects emerging. The first category is thinking about really this crypto native, almost vertical AI platform. And I would put Dfinity in here predominantly, which is sort of focusing on an entirely on-chain experience of AI. And another one that's launched recently is Open Gradient. They're looking at sort of end-to-end decentralized AI platform. And then there's this middle category, which is just crypto native versions of the horizontal activities that I showed earlier. So decentralized compute, decentralized training to a degree, decentralized inference, et cetera. And there are many, many projects that are already launched and some that existed pre-generative AI that were already doing decentralized storage and a number of other such decentralized versions of horizontal activity. And then the last one is a bit of a catch-all, but is thinking about sort of AI as an optimizer or debugger, and sort of really changing the user experience for Web3, whether it's by just making it more interactive in a chatbot sort of interface, or on the back end auditing or debugging code so that it is more efficient. So there's a number of projects that are doing that. And I thought I'd just focus and give a snapshot view of that middle zone, so the decentralization of those horizontal activities. We really have already so many different projects in this space, and this is just a tiny snapshot of the ones that I look at all the time. But worth thinking about, how many different approaches there already are. There's a very cool product called Venice.ai, which if you use any of the existing chat interfaces, it's worth trying Venice.ai and seeing the difference in the results you get, because it's essentially a private uncensorable AI agent that runs on decentralized computation. But we have many, many kinds of projects, everything from decentralized storage, decentralized compute, video subnets that deliver AI video. So really interesting opportunities to look at where AI is headed in the Web3 space. Recently, if we start to zoom out and think about how AI and Web3 will sort of permeate the economy, I like this announcement that was from Brian Armstrong at Coinbase, that Coinbase basically did their first AI to AI crypto transaction. And to me, this really highlights something that's been a long-standing goal in the Web3 space, which is that this is infrastructure for machines and algorithms to use. It's the economic rails that are run on code. And so there's really every reason to imagine sort of robots as the next consumer class, and that this is where the market is heading, is for AIs to be able to transact autonomously. But when we start zooming that far out into, what does our economy look like, and how do all the pieces fit together, I think it's really increasingly important to know that different countries are looking at this as well. And obviously, in sort of this race for AI dominance, it matters a great deal what your digital infrastructure looks like. So recently, a friend of mine, Marcy Harris from PopVox, she wrote an article that highlighted that essentially 15 parliament buildings across African nations were designed, built, and continue to be maintained, in this case by China. And that includes their digital infrastructure. And so you can imagine that, countries are concerned and looking to, find alternatives and ways that they can remain digitally sovereign and sovereign over data that is from their nation, but also participate in a future that is, a world of growing intelligence. And so public AI is getting more attention. It's an interesting realm that I think will take many different forms. Just, in the last year, so October of 23, we started seeing OSI pursue a specific definition of open source for AI, because open source software has its own definition, but AIs incorporate more than really just software. It includes the model and the weights, et cetera. And that got released. Their first draft was released this October of that definition. I highly recommend people look at it. And then we saw, in August of this year, the Public AI Network launched their network at the Library of Congress and had a white paper. In that case, focused a bit more on the US, but certainly the group is much broader and international in scope. Vanderbilt put out a paper, their policy accelerator did, on the need for public AI to be a national security topic. And I think that's very relevant, but there was literally no mention of Web3 or decentralizing technologies as part of a public framework, which I thought was a missed opportunity. And then just another example, Mozilla, in this past October, a month ago, released their public AI white paper, which seems to be the direction that they're heading in for their organization. So I would say I want to end on this idea that we are actually at a crossroads where the future of our digital world could either lead to a rebirth of knowledge or its capture. And Web 2 could win out with some of the old models of vertical capture around knowledge and productization. So my call to action for everyone is that we actually need to make Web 3 the destination for AI projects and ensure that our future is one about choice. Thank you very much. I hope we get to talk about a lot of the public AI stuff, but we'll see.
No. Thank you, Bettina. Thank you very much. Well, all these questions that Bettina has put it on the discussion, on the debate, are very interesting. Now we will follow with a presentation. With Lydia Arnau. Lydia Arnau is a professor on the University of Barcelona, specialized on contractual law. And she will make a presentation more about the transparency that is part of our discussion. And then we'll talk about an experience with Albert Danta that we had in the Center Blockchain of Catalonia with the Agency of News in Catalonia. And finally, we will make a debate on ourselves. Okay, Lydia, thank you.
Thank you.
Sí, sí, sí.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to say that I sincerely appreciate the invitation to participate in this meeting. Even though I admit I am not a technology lover as much as many of you, nor do I have the technology skills that many of you probably have. So I am sorry for. We are talking about trust and about traceability of information in the digital age, in this digital hard work. In this context, I just would like to share some ideas that focus overall on consumer, but not consumer in general like citizen, but consumer in a legal sense as participant in contracts for goods and services in the market. The starting point, obviously, is that a strong democracy requires well-informed consumer. But for that, information must be transparent. If information is not transparent, we cannot rely on it. But the question is, what means transparency in this context? Nowadays, the word transparency appears everywhere. I feel that. Transparency here, transparency there, everywhere. And more regulation incorporate transparency requirements. That suggests me two questions. The first, are always the rule, this new regulation, transparent themselves? If we admit that transparency means comprehensibility, it really means a lot more, but if we admit that transparency means comprehensibility, on my opinion, some of this new regulation, I am thinking on European law, some of these new regulation are not transparent or are not transparent enough because they have directly adopted technology language instead of trying to adapt technology to legal language. On my opinion, an example of this is the European Union regulation on market on crypto assets. The second question, when European consumer law introduced mandatory rules about pre-control or ongoing obligation of information and requires this information be clear, accessible, sufficient, true, and transparent, what means in this context transparency? Transparency should enable the consumer to make informed decisions for themselves. Transparency involves not only linguistic intelligibility, but also economic transparency. That means that the control clauses that describe the object control and the price should enable the consumer to evaluate the real cost that involves for him the contract. Enable the consumer, but which consumer? The average consumer. But who is the average consumer? This is another question. Nowadays, the transparency is put in question when the contract is a smart contract. It said, for instance, that the transparency of the smart contract is of limited use if the aim is to understand it. Why? Because this smart contract is generally published in source code, and not everyone has competence to read the code and determine the rules involved. So in this moment, I am waiting to know how the Court of Justice of the European Union apply the requirement about transparency in this kind of contract. Finally, I put in the presentation for is usable for someone of you. The rule that is in the Digital Services Act, that rule on liability of providers of intermediary services. This rule only establishes when the provider cannot be held liable in relation to illegal content provided by the recipient of the services. But the rule not establish when these provided are liable, only establish exemption on responsibility.
Thank you very much. Really, I learned quite interesting things. And later on the debate, we will talk about this question of transparency, because I think the transparency is related to who receives the information, as I understood you, no? Because you can explain one thing to one person and maybe doesn't understand what is behind. I think here AI can help a lot on reach this transparency. Albert, we run together the Center Blockchain of Catalonia, that we are very proud of it, I think. And one of the projects that we had there in the Center Blockchain of Catalonia was with the Agency of News of Catalonia about traceability of information. And I think that could be very interesting that Albert, who lead this project, and with this agency, explains the experience about this idea of traceability of information. I think was photos, no, basically, or
yeah, images especially, but also videos, and it's applicable for contents, written contents too. But the idea was pretty simple. Well, as a media agent, the News Agency of Catalonia, their first asset is the credibility, the trust. They sell news to all different media, digital media, paper media, and on TV media, and they live or its credibility. And in that moment, there were we were talking about 2 or 3 years ago, and that moment the word of fake news was in mouth of everybody, and now it's spread it with the AI. But in the moment, yeah, many people talk about the difficulty to distinguish among real and fake news. And we as a center, as a blockchain center, we thought that we could provide a solution that could give more guarantees about the information that they were sharing. And we propose a very simple solution that was every image that an author put to they have a marketplace of images and contents that where the freelancers, the reporters or photographers sell to the agency, and the agency distribute among the media. Each image that the photographers upload to the marketplace should be has hash, should be published in the blockchain. And when a media publish that image, it's mandatory to put the hash, the stamp, and the proof of that image had not been modified. And if it was, they have to put a link to the original media, because not only you can have a real photo or image or video, but you can edit it in a way that you are absolutely distortioning the reality. For example, the point of view, if you close the macro, if you close the zoom or open the zoom, and things like that. And what those that was the first aspect that we treat. The user, the audience could verify the origin and the validity of the image. The second point was, okay, but the images for these photographers, freelance or media that buy the contents to the agency, they have the problem that many other media, not so legal, they republish that images without paying. We incorporate also a proof of that you had the license to publish that images and that contents, because well, they in the same way they had a hash that they could prove that media has the rights to publish. And finally, the third point that we try to help to solve or to help especially is the royalties. If this media is sold to third parties, that the author could know to have the transparency that where this media have sold and had the royalty that belongs to them. And this is, well, I think this is one of the reasons that the center was created, was to use the blockchain for useful things. Nowadays, obviously with AI, this problem has augmented exponentially, and it's much bigger than now. And this is a continuous project that will improve, and it's mandatory to introduce other mechanisms, also other AI mechanisms to control all the images. But I think that, well, the project is there, and I think it's a good contribution of the blockchain to the fake news.
Thank you, Albert. I think it's a good point, this point. Last weeks, we had a natural disaster in Spain. I don't know if you are aware, Bettina, but in Valencia, we had a floods that has caused a lot of deaths and damage. And during the days that happened, and during the urgency, the more urgency times, and has been published a lot of fake news that then has been, let's say, broadcasted and augmented and made bigger by the social media and AI. Because at the end, if you go to Perplexity, and these days you ask for something that is happening, or you go to Grok, the AI that is from Twitter and is feeding from the tweets, what is saying this AI is what the tweets are saying. And these tweets, the beginning of this, of one of the biggest, let's say, fake news, that was the number of deaths, that initially, the first days, they said 3,000 possible deaths, that the source of this news has been for a legacy media, and for a very important legacy media. But okay, the source is there, and then suddenly they take this new, and that is made bigger and bigger from the social networks, and let's say Twitter, but also TikTok and Instagram and all. and taking this number as the truth. Like, let's say that in this case, the provenance, and sometimes we are claiming for knowing the provenance of the information, the provenance will not solve not a lot, because the provenance was a legacy media, a theory trustable media. Okay. Then I think that how you think that AI could help to solve this and not to become the engine that is pumping and let's say blowing the globe as this. What do you think that AI can do for that, for solving that? Is to you, Bettina, but then for all participants and also for the transparency question.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's a great question. On the one hand, it's sort of true of all technologies, right? They exacerbate certain problems, also offer new tools for solving some of our existing and maybe even age-old problems. You know, I think there's definitely going to be a realm of AI-based tooling that enables greater identification and reputation, either markers or sort of credibility scores based on, you know, seeing how many sources are describing certain activities or numbers. So you can imagine that instead of maybe, you know, some particular piece of news going viral, you're going to get the ability to see, you know, how many different sources are reporting it and what the reputation of those sources are, to sort of adjust over time for a greater confidence in information. So I do think a lot of that is possible, and certainly becomes more possible if we can digitally identify, you know, humans and AIs separately, and also rely on the sort of chain of events that have occurred for information from its origin all the way through. So I do think, you know, Web3 becomes a really beneficial asset in both parts of that, in the identity story, as well as in the ability to sort of actually trace information over time, and verify that it has, you know, how it's interacted with. But I'd love to hear what Albert thinks too.
Yeah, I agree. For me, to identify the author of the source is basic. And I think what can AI do? For example, disestimate all the information that doesn't come with an author, with an intellectual property or things like that. I always defend the idea that all the content generated in the internet should have an author, and maybe it's time to make a standard about the contents where includes that point. And if you don't have you can identify the author of a content, it's estimated for the searchers and for the AI and things like that. And the other way, if it's good and it's in reply and it's spread for all the world, that recognizes the vision of the source. And for me, it's not a technical question; it's a question of do it.
Okay, yeah. What I see for both of you, that we are coming to always to the same place. That is the digital identification, identity, and the proof of humanity. I think that is urgent, becomes urgent.
Not just humanity. I defend that the content can be generated by AI, but with a responsible behind the AI should be someone that responds to the cause.
Then this behind is proof of humanity or identity or digital identity. My question to the lawyer is what you are used to study the contracts and the transparency in the contracts, and I think this question of digital identity, you see historically that you have contracts with no identity. Do you can make a contract with somebody that you don't know who is?
No. You can you must be responsible, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I don't contract without now who is the other
Exactly.
contractor. Me is my position, but
Yeah, but the law general, or let's say the story of the law
every people, Iliad, a lot of people that contract online. And if you answer about whom you ask contract, perhaps the answer is I don't know.
This logic, because
But,
when you
but
contract,
you must to now, you must to be responsible to know who is the other part. The contract is not fulfilled, to whom you will claim if you don't know who is the other part.
yeah,
I would like to call to responsibility of people. I think it's very important to have an education that show you cannot rely on all of news that appear on the media. It's my opinion. You have to.
Yeah. You're going to the self responsibility of being, yeah. But
It can be a contract without one part.
one part, yeah. What's happening with fake news and all these news in internet, that is a contract only with one part, because the other part you don't know who is, and maybe it's nobody. And was the case in Valencia. A lot of the news were generated and then pumped by the system. Yeah, but my question was, in law exists this kind of contracts only one part? Always you need
No. It is possible contracts of one part. In some cases, we call auto contractation, but it's other thing. No.
Then
But it's possible that I don't know who is the other part.
possible.
It's possible.
Well, it's happening.
It's happening.
A lot. It's happening. Okay, then the question is also for Bettina. What are the challenges that you see for implementing this traceability and provenance? Because it's long time talking. I told this experience of Albert is 2 years old, at least, and the idea maybe 3 years.
Maybe 3 years. Yes.
Yeah, and we are talking, and I heard a lot of a possible experience that this big agency in the world has done, but the people is really not deploying these solutions. What is avoiding? What do you think are the challenges to have this provenance deployed of information?
I mean, one of the, you're totally right. We've been also talking about many of these solutions since really the earliest days in blockchain as well. I mean, probably my very first project was an identity project in 2015. So, that's almost 10 years ago now. I think identity, the question there is definitely one about standards and scalability. We are seeing some interesting standards emerge. Certainly there's one from Luxo called Universal Profile, in which you could essentially compile many different portions of an identity and use it across multiple kinds of blockchains. So there are some interesting standards, and he, of course, if you follow sort of blockchain history, invented ERC-20 with Vitalik in terms of standards, and ERC-725. So, he's sort of known as the godfather of standards to a degree in the Web3 space. But I think identity comes with it a scalability question around, ideally the proof of humanity portion, and certainly linkages to government and other forms of credentialing that are really important. So that's the scaling question. There has been one for a long time of, yes, there are solutions that are possible, but how do we get enough people to adopt those solutions at scale and therefore make them meaningful? I think, some of the other traceability questions, or you were asking sort of what are the bottlenecks to it. I actually think we're going to see some real opportunities and new tooling emerge, which is great. The part that worries me a little bit is maybe the lack of coordination on, at least so far, there's sort of early stages of public versions for the tech stack behind AI, but so much of it really is relying on private enterprises that are producing the top models right now. And so I think that will be something to really pay attention to going forward, and is an important area for greater investment so that there really is a robust alternative. It doesn't mean that that's what gets most used, but I think if you don't have alternatives in a marketplace, you don't really have a competitive environment in which you get the best innovation and maintain freedoms for individuals and for other kinds of communities up to the nation state level. So yeah, I mean, some of them are just scalability questions about what's going to be the tipping point. And it is motivating, at least I think for me, that there are parts of the intersection between AI and Web3 that end up meaning, affordances around longstanding Web3 innovations can be really important, whether it's zero knowledge proofs or some of the other ones we talked about. But that we actually get the usability function from AI, so that things are that you could actually just chat with an AI and end up having more sort of human readable, human intelligible communication around what's happening behind the scenes, even though you are not a coder, that kind of thing. So I think there is going to be tooling that comes about that is really bolsters our autonomy, and that will hopefully eventually lead to the scalability, maybe the tipping point for blockchain adoption.
Okay, adoption. That is the song that we we sang in our center. It was the mission of the center also. Adoption.
And maybe the generative AI can bring the facility to use the user-friendly blockchain.
Possibly. But what I think that Bettina said is, to me, the key question. To adopt certain questions is the standards. We need a certain standards. And what you said, Vitalik, RC20 standard, that was, but there was let's say, a motivation to adopt this standard because it was economic motivation. The people was incentivized to adopt because there is behind money. I think that we need maybe to find other motivations to adopt the identity standards and all. Anyway, we reached the end of our panel. Well, thank you very much, Bettina, for your time and your passion being so far. The next time, I will be very happy that you come to Barcelona. You will enjoy the time here.
Me too. Definitely. Thank you so much, Kirse.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Lydia, also for your time and your thoughts. And Albert, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.